Dear students, hello one more time. So today we're going to talk about one of the most interesting but most difficult topics about the warfare. And it's quite difficult to talk about war, but definitely it's more harder to understand war, to learn war, and to see the preconditions and conditions that are causing war. Some people believe that this is a human nature, and indeed conflict is a part of our nature being. The other are talking about the global tendencies and the construction of the powers in the global politics that is causing countries to have the war. So let us jump in and see how we can understand war, how we can understand the present war, and eventually what are the possibilities to fix the war. Is it possible at all? And can we make our lives and societies better? So let us talk a little bit about the modern conflicts, the transformation of warfare. So we will talk a little bit about the classical war, what is it, about what are the modern trends of war, what are the asymmetric warfare and hybrid warfare, how they defined what we see right now in the global process. And definitely we'll talk a little bit about the economy of war and how much do we pay at the taxpayers for the other countries and our governments also to fight. But before we start, I just want to ask you, do you know what it is? Any guesses? So you can stop video and pause it and Google a little bit, and those who like history can define that this is actually the first ever recorded mention about war or about armed conflict. I will use both terminology. So this is 2,500 of years before Christ, and this is, you see the picture of the Sumerians and Elam fight in the ancient Mesopotamia. And since that time until now, we are living actually in the times of the warfare. And despite all the attempts, despite all the centuries, and despite all the peaceful treaties and the developments of our states, nevertheless, we should admit that war is a part of our life. And to prove it, and I just want to show you a few data. So how do you think what it is? You can also take a pause and Google this number, but 15,000, this is actually the number of conflicts that were defined and that happened in the world. So can you imagine, for the whole history of civilization, more than 15,000 of conflicts? This is creation of the humanity. What do you think what it is? 3,500 of years. This is the years of the practically the years of the human civilization as we see it right now. And out of these years, 268 years, these are the only years without war. So we can also see that the majority of times in history, we are actually keeping fighting and killing each other. And this number, what do you think? Yeah, unfortunately, those who are thinking about the fatality or deaths during the conflicts, during the warfare, are pretty correct. This is the number of people that were killed during all the wars practically in our human history. And what do you think about this number of approximately 50 to 70 different according to different estimations, million of people? This is also the number of deaths or fatalities of the major war in our history. This was the Second World War. So you can see by these numbers that actually people can think that warfare or conflict is a part of our human civilization. And it's really pity for that, but nevertheless, we should take into account the reasons and the nature of fighting trying to fix them somehow. And by these terms, we can see that the majority actually of the big wars is likely to be a history. So this is the chart that shows a number of deaths in the world and the years that are coming. And I can see that despite like the flow of the time, we have different examples of different warfares, so we can stop and see more detail right here. But closer to the other years, we can see actually that the number of the warfares with the big number of deaths is decreasing, and this is a good sign if we talk about warfare. Why it's happening? Because actually the nature and the logic of warfaring, of doing war, is changing. And I am referring here to the classical understanding of war that was presented by Karl von Clausewitz, or the general on the Prussian army. So he formed so-called the Trinitary theory of war, in which we have government or king or monarch who is ruling and who has the right to declare a war, who has interests, and it is considered that his or her interests are actually the interests of society. Then we have armed forces who actually are doing battles, yes, who are actually implementing his or her will. Or if you talk about the republic, so the will of the people, of the deputies who are under the power. And then we have people who, from the one point of view, supporting this, creating this interest, this public interest, and supporting or not supporting the politics of government, but actually they are also supporting army with resources, and simply with soldiers. So army is coming from the soldiers. And there is a famous joke that made by the Karl von Clausewitz that the ruler, yes, or the king or the monarch is actually ruling, is starting war, armed forces are fighting, and people are usually suffering. However, in this trinitary theory of war, this is one very remarkable thing, that the major warfare was here. So usually this trinitary or the triad of the war means that the government who is representing people's will is definitely engaged into the war. However, people should not be engaged too much. So that simply means that the professional army was created to fight for each other and to fight for the interests and rule of the people. And very unlikely, in the majority of cases, people were killed. So civilians, they killed. Sometimes that happened, and this happened mostly. However, they were not target. They were not primary target. So the primary target were armed forces, and that is why even in some literature we can see the notion of the just war. Yes, that is showing how these rules between the warfaring parties should be done. And starting from that time, actually, we can see that in the majority of the treaties and agreements between states, this tendency somehow to regulate the war was also done. That is why, for example, we have so-called the Geneva Conventions that were defined in how we should do war when we are fighting, how to protect the civilians, how to protect the soldiers, what is the status of soldiers, for example, who are captured, what is the status of soldiers who are injured, or, for example, what is the status of the ecology, the trees, and the buildings during the warfare. So the countries were trying to somehow to regulate this. However, as we may know, then doesn't fix dramatically this situation. Why? Because simply we have the change of the warfare, and we can determine it by the data. What is important to state here on this chart that I use from the Our Bolden Data website, we can see the actually the number of years and the number of the wars that was caused by the so-called the great powers. So the major states within the politics, and these are and to general terms, all these wars were caused by states. Because right now, we will be talking a little bit about it later, we have the non-state actors more and more actively engaged into the warfare. But here, you can actually see that right now, in this millennium, in this century, we can see almost decline of the great powers. So these great powers of the great states who contribute mostly to economic development, to the political development, cultural development of the world, whatever, they used to use other tactics. And this is actually the outcome of all these limitations that we have right now. International law is limiting. People in the democratic countries are also limiting governments from the possibility to recognize war or to start the warfare. And we have a number of different regulations inside of the constitutions and laws, and that are making this process really, really difficult than it was like 2 or 3 centuries ago, when some monarch could simply put a degree and let's go. So the people are fighting. And however, these regulations of war trying to make it rather difficult, nevertheless, we should admit that this practice of warfaring was not stopped. And the reason of that is that we changed to some point of view the usage of war as a political tool, especially when we are talking about some resources, warfare or warfare for land, for resources. However, the new factors appeared. And what are these new factors? They are actually different. Yes, different scientists were trying to predict the present outlook of warfare. Majorly, all these predictions were done after the end of the Cold War. So we can see that Francis Fukuyama was predicting that ideological conflicts, yes, they will come to the end after the Cold War, when the liberal democracy and capitalism actually won these games with Soviet Union and with socialism. So he proclaimed that conflicts will be present, however, not so major, and they'll be happening on the battlefield of identity. So there will be identity fightings, and that's what we see right now with different ideologies, but not state-owned ideologies. By ideologies as the part of the identity building between different social groups or people that are present right now. Or for example, Samuel Huntington, famous his Clash of Civilization, who predicted that now there will be the clashes between nation states. However, the natural conflicts for resources or for the land will be replaced by the culturally driven conflicts between civilizations. So civilization will clash. Thomas Friedman was writing about the economic conflicts and economic wars that indeed are happening in our world. And this is indeed the impact of globalization and of global trade or with the global competition on that. And finally, the Jared Diamond, in his beautiful book, The Collapse. Actually, I do recommend you to read all these books. They're fantastic. So he predicted the possibility of the ecological factors, ecological catastrophe to cause conflict. So to his mind, in the future, or even right now, or in the nearest future, due to hardships in ecology, in our ability to take care of nature, we will see fightings not for the resources of ideology, but simply for the possibility to find a safe and a good place to live. And to some extent, we can say that all these dimensions of the warfare are present right now. So we can find the wars or conflicts, armed conflicts, according to these ideas. However, no one of these predictions or idea actually win the battle. So no one of these factors are dominating factor of the present war. So if we speak about the modern conflict, what this conflict look like? Yes, how this change of the classical warfare is happening. I'll use here data by the Uppsala University. They have a center for researching the conflicts, and they were doing it for years, and they have really good data and fixing all the conflicts that are happening on the world. So according to them, we can see that starting from the end of the Second World War, we have tremendous increase of so-called the intrastate conflicts, this green field, and internationalized intrastate conflicts. While, for example, we have decline of the interstate warfares and practically zero extrastate warfares. So what does it mean? This word mean? So the extrastate conflict are conflict that is happening between the two countries, but on the battlefield of the other country. So, for example, when Soviet Union and United States, to some extent, have the battle in the Afghanistan in the 80s, so it could be considered like the extrastate conflict. Or, for example, the same story in Vietnam. Interstate, this is a classical conflict between the states, for example, India and Pakistan, that are declared, officially declared, yes, between the two states. And UCDP is usually using this data, so these visualizations will be about the state-based conflicts, because I will also use a data about non-state actors involved into the conflict. Internationalized interstate conflicts, or let's begin with the interstate conflicts. Intrastate conflicts, these are the conflict that is happening on the one territory of the state or part of the conflict, but actually the other state is interested somehow. So it is penetrating, it is going to this territory, not fighting directly like between the interstates. So not two parties, not two countries are fighting with each other, but actually some of the party is using whatever, like extremist groups or separatist groups or whatever, and support them. And by this support, they are fighting with the country. So here we can say that actually this is the definition of the internationalized interstate. And the good example of that is unfortunately Ukrainian conflict, when Russia was using separatist forces on Donbass and is doing this warfare on the territory of Ukraine. And the intrastate conflict this is so-called civic conflict that is happening inside of the state, and the reasons could be different, starting from the partisan battling to recognize them as a country, or like so-called separatist movements, or simply this could be battles of the organized crime or the guerrilla movements inside of the country. So we can see right now that this intra-state, so inside of the countries, these cases are increasing tremendously, while starting from the 2004, so the mid of the 2000s, we can also see that the good neighbors or interested countries are also trying to be engaged into these conflicts once more. Ukraine-Russian war is a perfect example of the internationalized. So this is we are not talking about the civil war as in Russian propaganda. However, according to the international law, Ukrainian conflict is considered to be internationalized intrastate conflict together. So we have two definitions: so internationalized intrastate conflict, and also the interstate conflict between Russia and Ukraine, both ways. What is also interesting here, that when we see such kind of localization of war inside of the countries rather than outside of the countries, we can also see the increased number of conflicts between the non-state conflicts. So that simply means that these are wars or battles that are happening not between the countries, but between the organized crime groups, guerrilla movements or partisans, between the private armies or private combatants, how they call it in the international law, and for example, terroristic groups, and you can go so on and so forth. And actually, their number, as we can see, is increasing. So if you take the armed conflict by the intensity, if you are wondering, are they bigger or are they smaller? Because during the Cold time period, it was considered that after the Cold War will end, we will see the splash of very small conflicts. Well, for example, but they will be minor conflicts because during the Cold War there were much lesser conflicts, and we can see it actually. But however, the outcomes of this warfaring was much bigger. So what we can see right now that yes, this theory, actually this hypothesis proves to be valid, and right now we have the increased number of conflicts that are really minor, that are happening, not involving all territory of the state, but actually on the borders lines that are happening or in some regions. So even Ukrainian conflict, so we are all engaged into the war with Russia. However, the exact domain of the warfaring is not happening on the whole territory of Ukraine, but only in the one part in the Donbas region. So we can see that this trend, this dimension, that such minor warfaring is happening more often. And what area is the most dangerous in terms of the conflicts? Yes, quite right. Africa and Asia are growing in the number of cases, while Europe and America is declining. So here we can see a little splash, just because it was 2014, also connected with Ukraine. And we can see also that Middle East is still unstable there. So this is a state-based conflict. But practically the same story with the not state conflicts that are engaged. So first of all, once more, we can see increase the total number of the non-state conflicts in the whole world. And later, we can see that Africa is dominated, mainly because paramilitary groups, unofficial groups, or unofficial sources, and also terrorist groups, private armies are very widely included into the battling, even with the official governments. What is also interesting here, this is increase of the conflicts, non-state conflicts in Americas. That is actually happening in Latin America, and mainly because once more of the private armies, narco cartels, and also clashes between the organized crime and and state police or other groups, but in any case, they are non-state actors that are involved, and definitely terrorist groups, So if we think about the fatalities, are these conflicts becoming more and more dangerous? To some extent, we can see the decline, especially if we take into account the civil conflicts. So intrastate conflicts that are happening inside of the countries. And we can see that the major conflicts between states that caused the number of fatalities actually ended in the 50s, so after the Second World War. However, this situation was kept until the recent years, because starting from the 2010s, we can see the increase of number of fatalities, usually not per one conflict, because this is per one conflict, yes, if in general, but in general we can see the increasing number of the fatalities that is happening in the state-based conflict where state is present, but also we can see increase a number of the fatalities from the non-state conflicts. So and it is growing. So you can compare this gray zone like during the 80s and the 90s, and then you can see that it's much more growing between the non-states. So the non-state groups becoming more and more dangerous for citizens, for people who are fighting that. And one-sided violence is usually like the terroristic attacks. Also, we can see that while the number increased a little bit, but in general, it's the same, pretty the same, or even lower than it was like in the 90s, when some of the party and some of the army attacked like civil citizens or civilians, I mean, or for example, some groups of the states. So if the other world becoming more and more safer, this is the major and most interesting case. And here we have such data. There is so-called Global Peace Index that is studying such cases. So what are they doing? So they are collecting different measurements, mainly three dimensions, three domains. And the first domain, they are studying the cases of the security inside of the states, of state security and the state safety. So organized crime is also included. The second domain, they are researching if the country is in the warfare. And the third domain, these are expenditures and levels of the militarization. And what is interesting here to state that the countries that spend lesser for militarization, that are going down, they do not feel their engagement into the conflicts, and when the countries actually have pretty good level of the security, so these countries are greener. While, for example, these countries, as we see red, they have troubles with all these measurements. So what we can see right now, that slightly this year specifically was a little bit better in terms of the global security comparing with the previous years. So we have 87 countries declared like improvements in all these three factors for the global peace, and only 73 have these deteriorations. So the level was going down. However, this is only comparison with the present world, with the present year, because in general, if we take like longer perspective, we can see that overall trend is of insecurity is growing. So the peacefulness actually declined and is declining. And this is really sad. On the other point of view, in terms of the militarization, so we can state that the majority of the countries are not highly militarized. So in case of the big, huge warfare, war all for all, bellum omnius contra omnes, yes, as Hobbes wrote, we can't say that it will be really so the militarization, so we can't say that the militarization, so that we have too much weaponry, so, and that's why it could cause the world. However, there are still a number of countries that the level of militarization is increasing. However, this year was very specific, and the previous year, because in general, 80 up to 90 countries, they actually reduce the level of the military expenditures and the percentage of the GDP, and near 70 countries, they lowered their levels of nuclear and heavy weaponry. And that was quite good in terms of the keeping the other world much more safer. What will be the next, we will see definitely, but however, we see the trend that we are not, unfortunately, becoming more and more secure. So if we draw a line, so what could we say about the present conflicts, what they look like today? We definitely know that there are lesser wars between the great powers, that are happening on the old territories of the state. So we can declare that we have right now localization of war becoming more and more local. However, we can see a trend of the internationalization of war. Even if it is happening on the borders, in the small territories, nevertheless, good friends, good neighbors are usually engaged into this world, these warfares, and make them internationalized. Then we see the asymmetry of war. So that means that not equal countries or powers are clashing with each other. Once more, if we even take Ukrainian conflict with Russia, we can see that we have different powers. So I mean military powers and also political influence with Russia. So this is called usually the asymmetry of the warfare. Then we can declare the multi-domain operations that happened before the present years. It was naturally okay to have to use only one dimension or a few dimensions. So by this I mean the war on the battleground, or in the sea, or for example in the air war. However, right now the majority of operations, especially when they are happening with the inclusion of the state, they're happening in the multi-domain perspective. So in the same period of time, like on the ground, in the space, in the air, could be in the space, also in the digital, so cyber warfare, everything is combined together. Then we can see the trend of the etatization of war, so-called. So the etat, this means the state in French. Yes, so this is the etatization. That means that the state is losing their presence in the warfare, and the more and more non-state actors, private armies, or officially private combatants are engaged into the warfare. And finally, not finally, we can see that the generation of war. This simply means that we have the vanishing of borders between military and civil, especially during the terrorist attacks. More and more civil people are killed or injured. We have hybridization of war. That simply means that not only conventional weaponry as classical weaponry is used. Why? Once more, because of degeneration of war, when we need to hit not only professional army, but also the society. Yes, and information could be also powerful weaponry, as we can see right now during the Ukrainian and Russian conflict. And the final characteristics of the present conflict, armed conflict, I mean, this is technologization of war. So cyber warfare appeared, more and more digital technologies are becoming the part of war. Also cyberspace is used for that, and in general this was described actually by Toffler brothers when they were writing about the fourth generation of war. So that is happening right now, and the fourth generation of war, they mean that less and less people will be engaged, but more technologies will be engaged into the warfare. Asymmetric warfare. Let us jump into the details of these newly established dimensions and see what we can take from them. So the asymmetric warfare. Usually we understand by asymmetric warfare when we have the clashes of different parties that are not equal by size, by power, military power, economic power, and so on and so forth. So Andrew Mark wrote a beautiful article, Why Big Nations Lose. And in this article, he actually started to collecting different cases and presented different cases of such asymmetric warfare. And he stated this asymmetric is mainly this inequality or disparity even in the military power between the opposition actors that are involved into the conflict. So the examples of the asymmetry that are not they are not recent, so they are pretty old, but now they're becoming more and more widespread. So if you talk about like 300 Spartans, yes, that are fighting with the big army, yeah, this is asymmetric warfare, or guerrilla, for example, fightings, or for example, usage of partisan movement with the nation state, with the professional army. This is like asymmetry that is happening. So examples of the asymmetry. So asymmetry could be done in different trajectories, not only in terms of the military power or weaponry, but it could be different resources. Could be different, like cost on economy that could be spent for the battlefield than information or even media. So because usually countries or the governments, they have more media access than, for example, those parties who are fighting with the government. Let's take, for example, some social tensions in Ukraine during the Revolution of Dignity, or recently in Belarus, yes, how the media was blocked and these channels and canals blocked. So this is a perfect example of the asymmetry that is happening. But in general, I think the asymmetric warfare could also cause, you see, the changing like nature, yes, and this is like the one of the caricatures, yeah, that you see then how the civilians are protecting. Yes, so the very powerful access to information sharing can also be example of the asymmetry. So this is speculations right now here, yeah, but for the Israel army that is protecting civilians, and we can see here the Hezbollah movements of civilians are protected. So I mean the access to the media, the creation of the media could also be the part of the asymmetric warfare. But in general terms, those asymmetric actions are more powerful when they are focused not like in the classical conventional warfare on the government and military. So, and the main idea is to cut the possibility of government to protect themselves, or cut the possibility of army to fight, but actually on government and population. So here at the battlefield, just to cut the possibility of government to feel support from people, to prove that government are ineffective, unsuccessful, and actually to spoil their reputation. So this is a major asymmetric hit and the major logic of the asymmetry usually. And usually terrorist groups can use this with these attacks to show that government can't control. Or for example, the disinformation flows or in social media could also use like the asymmetry fighting to show that people lose their trust and support of the governmental action. So, you know, this is like the asymmetric battlefield that is actually happening. Stephen Metz wrote in his article that usually in such type of conflicts, when we have the asymmetry, it's very hard for the power that is not so strong to win the game. However, if they are using this asymmetric logic, so they are not clashing with each other as an equal, but they are creating such opportunities to fight when they could be stronger, and mainly fight like in this field, not in this field, government military field, but in this field. Yes, so they appeared to be actually winners. And he calculated the number of different cases of the asymmetric warfare and proved that starting from the end of the Second World War, actually weak actors were winning all the games when the strong actors lose. And he called this situation like the lions can't fight reds. Yes, so they can't fight because they don't know how to do this. And this is not happening only in the informational dimension, but also, for example, in the cities, when we have the battlegrounds that is happening in the cities, when the regular armies with these tanks and so powerful that they can't be effective, for example, in the small cities. And Afghanistan was about that. Iraq was about that. So the people were retrained how to fight in the very concrete city conditions, acting like a non-regular forces, but actually acting like a partisans. So according to Steve Metz, you need to be a cat to fight a rat, not lion. And yes, this is a tendency when the weaker actors actually winning this game. And then bring us to the idea of the multi-domain operations that is the outcome of this asymmetric warfare. And by here, we can see that right now in the battles, in the war, they need to have cross-domain synergy. So we can see that the maritime forces, together with the land forces, together with the air forces, but also together with the space right now forces, also with the cyberspace that is present here. And when we have traditional fightings and traditional commanders, that someone was the maritime commander, we still have it, yes, or for example, some was the general, in the of the air forces, airbornes. Yes, right now, professional armies like United States and NATO armies, they trained their generals, then trained their professionals to work in all dimensions together, because the war is actually happening together. So they need to unite these forces. So even if we take, you see this anti-terroristic operation that is happening in the Donbass area. So right now, this is an operation by the united forces. So both military, both civil, police services, cyber service, and so on and so forth. So this create the necessity to unite different fields, this asymmetry. And even now we can see the informational warfare is also present here. So generals need also to explain and to act there. And yeah, so and this is how the European Union and NATO together and separately also, they are actually defining the interference into these different situations. So you see, for example, this is a common security and defense policy by European Union that could be both civil and that could be either civil, for example, or military. Yes. And NATO forces also could be present, mainly in the cases when we have like warfare, when the military forces should appear. But this also could be the cumulative utilities of the cumulative acts of these forces that are happening in the crisis situation. So when we have like the like arms control, when we have some disasters, or when we have some the peacekeeping measures, usually you can see that the EU and NATO countries, they use the civil forces, so they started civil-based operations. Then when we have like more tensions, when we have, for example, counterterrorism or peacekeeping operation, or humanitarian assistance, or for example, combating with with the combatants or private armies, like terrorist groups, whatever, we can both see the union of the civil and military forces. And here, starting from the limited conventional conflict or counterinsurgency, yes, so the military forces could appear. So this is a general comprehensive strategy of the common security defense policy of the European Union to act in all these three dimensions. Yes, to use forces to keep security in general in all these three conditions. Digitization of war. This simply means that if we compare, for example, by year, the number of actors that are involved, we can see that, for example, with the Syrian civil war, yep, we can see that the number, yes, of the other proxy conflicts that we can see. So the conflicts that are happening with not only with the country's involvement is actually pretty high. So different groups, different people are involved. Even in the Syrian civil war, we can see that this was not only government and not only partisans or separatists. So a number of different forces and groups were acting at the same period of time. And actually, by here, we can understand that the state control over the war is also changing. It's classically like in the Trinitarian theory of Clausewitz, we were considering that the states will also take control of the warfare, that they have monopoly, so-called monopoly of on the use of the forces, but not more. So they usually losing this legitimacy when in this gaming. Why? Because once more the erosion of state is happening, and actually the non-classical, non-state actors are involved major. And right now we also know that they are more and more using like this force together with the state. So state in the Weber's idea still have this monopoly on using of the force, but it's majorly losing it in the recent years. And that is why the private combatants, so-called private combatants, are creating, and the number of states actually are using these private combatants not as their regular army, avoiding taking of them responsibility, but using them in the number of the conflicts. And here you see a chart by the Infonapalm group of the Russian private military groups. Yes, famous Wagners that we know, this group. So this is not state, not official group, but that is actually playing on the battlegrounds and supported somehow by the Kremlin, by the Russian government. And we can see that the usage of these private combatants is increasing, and the number of such groups of increasing. And it's not only happening in the gray zone conflicts, it's also happening pretty officially. For example, one of the famous example, this is very powerful company, Triple Convoy, Virginia, that was formed in 2003, and now has more than 5,000 of people involved that were actually veterans of the military veterans of the United States war actions. And the tricky thing is that they are used not to fight, or not only to fight, but rather to protect. So just to save money, sometimes countries are using such private combatants, such groups, for example, to protect convoys, or for example, to protect some buildings, or for example, to support like the special treatment of the hospitals, or food trucks, food convoys that is landing on the territory of the base. So they are using such private combatants, such private armies. As you can see, in 2004, this group, Triple Convoy, they signed 1.5 billion of US dollars, can you imagine, contract in Iraq, supporting and protecting and guarding the food convoys. So they were responsible to clarify, yes, to protect the to protect the food security for the US Army. And why countries are using that? Simply because it's cheaper. It's much more cheaper, for example, than having and putting all this their staff, I mean army, on the risk. So they can use many of the private combatants for this feature. It's not only United States, it's not only Russia. You can see here, for example, the creation of the private combatants in China. And I was fascinated also to clear it up that in 2017, so here there are more than 5,000 registered private armies in China, and they provide their services approximately to 20 different countries in the world. So they're also acting overseas, and usually even Chinese government can also use them, because sometimes it is quite tricky for the government, for example, if they are, and Chinese guys were using that, if they are opening a factory and were doing it in the Middle East. So they were prohibited, according to the national laws, to use the official police forces. In the Middle East, in the number of the sheikhs countries, so the police forces of the Saudi, for example, Arabia, were provided. However, if the production is quite dangerous and need to be protected, so here the possibilities of the private armies appeared. So the Chinese government was paying to them to protect the factories and lands. The same also story was in the number of the Chinese businesses and factories that is happening all over the world. Currently, there were not big clashes, but could be in the future. So finally, such people like the Lord of War, yes, as we know by Lord of War, who are trading this weaponry, who are trading with countries, can also appear and are also appearing. So this is one of the part of big business on weapons that is present of the world, that is also causing a little bit more insecurity. Hybrid warfare, this definitely the new modern world that we know, that is widely spread. And by hybrid warfare, we usually understand a combination of different attacks. It is happening on not only on the conventional military attacks, yes, so by using by the forces, but also, for example, the cyber attacks or informational operations, social medias, in public distrust and disinformation. Also unconventional warfare, different security, breaking security actions, but also economic attacks, economic manipulations, and currently the part of the story could also be the legal warfare, yes, that is using in courts, in the international courts, to also to try to break the international regime. So everything that is combined together, all these fields, usually considered to be the hybrid warfare. And I just want to show you the visualization, like the what was made by Mark Voyager in his article 2015. You can see that politically, diplomatically, and lawfare, or intelligence, yes, or economic, crime, conventional. So different, together with the military, different fields are included into the way how Russia is targeting, for example, the Ukrainian society in Ukrainian case. In social, cultural tensions could also be. So this field could also be present. And this is what we understand by the hybrid warfare. Usually not only conventional weaponry could be pretty active. And I will use here a few data by the Global Security Pools organization that is researching actually the and showing also the panorama of the present conflict. So here we can see that the number of the so-called internationalized conflicts about which we talked a little bit a few minutes ago, is also increasing, and it's increasing not only within the conventional weaponry, yes, but also in the informational security, and actually this could be seen by the number of the harmful measures that is also increasing, not only in the conflicts with weapons. So, for example, if there is a DOS attack or cyber attack on some of the factories that could cause harms of the people's life, so this tendency is also growing. Yeah, and we can see this by the cyber attacks, for example, that are happening more and more often in different societies. And there is also, to some of the estimations, the famous countries who are majorly sponsoring the terrorist groups, cyber terrorist groups, and we can see here that the majority of the cases were coming by the supports sponsored, because they were not located in these countries, but maybe they even could be located in these countries. But the case is that it's sometimes hard to define these cyber terrorist groups where they are located. But to the different investigations, you can see that China, Russia, North Korea, and Iran are actively engaged in sponsoring such attacks. While, for example, we can also see that the United States and other countries like Israel or India or Pakistan are also financing such, usually counter-terrorist, but also hybrid attacks. For example, the first such hybrid attack was used by the Israel government, but the United States are usually also financing towards their enemies. And in terms of the hybrid warfare, what we can state clearly that the most recently, according to once more of the investigation of the global security polls, we can see that more often and more often countries right now starting to consider hybrid warfare as a part of the classical war. So they start to considering a hybrid conflict as the threat to their national security, therefore opening the centers used to war take into that consideration. Then that simply means that we are increasing threats, for example, in the cyber attacks and critical infrastructure, on economy. Some also that they put it into the activity of their military forces. Yes, and what is also trend that is simply that hybrid warfare and attacks, they're happening. The relations between the states, mainly because for the when we use like the cyber attacks to fraud, to find some information and use it in the wars. And these are, you can see here in the list that of the international orders, of the international rules and the international norms that could be really downward together by this hybrid warfare. Yes, for example, when the countries are starting to discriminate between trading partners, when the countries, so they're using like more often, not only protecting themselves, but also using this hybrid games, economic games, or in the informational warfare against each other. So technologization of war. To start with that, I want to show you one interesting video.
Customer pilots directed almost 3,000 precision strikes last year. We're super proud of it. It allows you to separate the bad guys from the good. It's a big deal. But we have something much bigger.
You see a little drone flying.
Your kids probably have one of these, right?
Yeah, we like drones.
Not quite. Hell of a pilot? No. That skill is all AI. It's flying itself. Its
Don't have
processor
pilot.
can react 100 times faster than a human.
Artificial
The stochastic motion is an anti-sniper feature.
intelligence is ruling.
Just like any mobile device these days, it has cameras and sensors, and just like your phones and social media apps, it does facial recognition.
Yeah.
Inside here is 3 grams of shaped explosive. This is how it works. Did you see that? That little bang is enough to penetrate the skull and destroy the contents. They used to say guns don't kill people, people do. Well, people don't. They get emotional, disobey orders, aim high. Let's watch the weapons make the decisions. Now, trust me, these were all bad guys.
You simply can identify, you see.
Now that is an airstrike of surgical precision. It's one of a range of products. Trained as a team, they can penetrate buildings, cars, trains, evade people, bullets, pretty much any countermeasure. They cannot be stopped. Now, I said this was big. Why? Because we are thinking big. Watch. A $25 million order now buys this. Enough to kill half a city. The bad half. Nuclear is obsolete. Take out your entire enemy, virtually risk-free. Just characterize him, release the swarm, and rest easy. These are available.
Yeah, and so forth and so forth. So the good news is that this presentation gladly isn't real. So this is Professor Stuart Russell, who actually, he's professor of artificial intelligence. So he created this presentation just to, and it was really became a viral. And it was just important for him to show that actually these technologies could be used. The case that we are not using right now them doesn't mean that we can't use it. And this video was so viral and powerful that actually there was a special summit of the UN, and on the General Assembly they discussed this topic. But the trouble, the tragedy of this case, why I show it, is just because we don't have regulations of drones. Not at all. We don't have the prevention measures how we can stop some governments or private companies or terrorist groups to actually to create and build them. In terms of technology, this is possible right now. So this is a really huge question, how we can stop like this unethical or other weaponry. And the case is that we like this weaponry. So that is so serious because we like this weaponry. Here, the intelligence, actually BI intelligence on their data, they shows that annually we spend more and more billion of US dollars for the drones hardware and software. And the case is that you can see here that we spend, that naturally the consumers, so we are buying privately, like to make shootings, to make videos, a little bit bigger than in 2015, and the government expenditures are also growing, but also enterprises are using that. And the case is, why not terrorists? So what should be done to protect ourselves from such awful possibility to kill with only three grams? And that also this technologization of war is definitely the natural process. So you can see and compare how much money are spent and what the technologies are used more, for example, to protect people. So the technologies are usually used more and more often by the armies on here, by the US Army, simply to protect, not to avoid the hitting of the person. And you can see how much money was spent on the Second World War and current operation, and what will be in the future. And definitely technologies like drones and everything else will be a part of this gaming. So this is a big question of the regulation, of the international and the national regulation, and this is very hard topic and hot topic, how we can control, what are the measures and what the agreements and treatments we can do just to stop this small tiny things of killing each other, together with the beside the nuclear weaponry that was proclaimed in this video. So sooner or later, why not, probably we will have something like this in terms of the technological battlegrounds of our soldiers, of our fighters. And that's definitely bring us to the idea of cost of the war. So how much war cost. And we can see right now, according to the estimations that include into the Katie Jones article, that we actually are spending more and more on the war, and in general the cost of violence, and here we consider all the money that is spent direct and indirect on the civil war, on the conflicts, on the terroristic, for example, organizations, and to stop it, is nearly 11% of the global GDP. So can you imagine 11% of the global GDP? And you can see here how the what was the price of the major global conflict that were happening like in the last few years. What is interesting right here that in the major of cases, the average cost of violence is actually, in the worst cases, the major cost of violence is up to 35% of the GDP. And this is like comparing to the 3.3% in the top 10 most peaceful countries. So whenever the conflict in country is, whenever the instability in country, insecurity in country is, that simply means that this country will spend more and more money just to calm down the situation. And that's simply create the unproportional possibility of the country to develop. So they simply can't develop. Means if you will not secure the stable and peaceful situation in the country, you can't develop. That's the simple rule that is coming out of this money. And here you can see the global comparison of the costs by the Global Peace Index 2019, how money is actually spent on the military expenditures comparing to the internal security that is still present. And you can see also here that globally the military expenditures actually taking the 3/4, yes, of the all expenditures that are spent for the security, and only like 10%, like what is happening in the countries, like this homicide issues are present. And yeah, and these military expenditures, they are also growing. So this that we should understand. And the majority of the cases, yes, we can see that the growing is happening in the Americas, but also in Asia. Countries tend also to spend more and more, according to the data by the 2017. And in general, you can see the composition of the different regions, how they spend money, yes, and you can see, but on the regional level, military expenditures they vary from 8 and actually 59 yes, 59% on the economic impact of the violence. And the military expenditures, you can see the greater, the bigger are in the Middle East and North Africa, so that they are taking all this money from the development. While, for example, in Europe, 35%, and if we take like the North America, in 45%. However, the internal security overall is much pretty the same in the countries, while, for example, the countries of the Caribbean and Central America, or for example, South America, when we have this the private combatants or organized crimes, you can see is that also the great sum of costs are spent for the violent crimes, like to stop these crimes, to secure the situation, while, for example, in the other countries, in the other groups, the percentage is not so big. So that comes us to the final point that that is represented in the Sustainable Development Goals 16. And Sustainable Development Goals, so the global goal is about peace, justice, and the strong institutions. So by here, we understand then simply the securitization of the situation is only possible when we are actually trying to engage not only prevention of the warfare, because sometimes the private companies or whatever can cause this war, but also this is a part of the civic engagement into the building of the institution. When we have a trend that non-private companies and not private combatants, not private business, actually private armies are created, or organized crimes are created, and they can penetrate the countries, they can unsecure the situation, that simply means that you tend to spend more to prevent this. And one of the way is actually not spending on the results, but investing a lot into the institutional building. And this is the main point. Without the stable peace, justice, and strong institutions, you can't build like this secure environment. And without the secure environment, definitely you will be under the threat and under the attack of the both hybrid warfare parties, asymmetric conflicts, cyber conflicts, and so on and so forth. So the only possibility to for countries, especially who witnessed the influence of the war, like Ukraine, as like institutional building. In other cases, we will spend much more money simply to try to secure the situation and try to stop this warfare that spending for nothing. It's not for nothing, but spending for mainly to secure this the outcomes, but not to secure the reason. So this is one of the strongest points, like that in SDG, the peace is at the same time as much important and built by the civic factors. And the reason is because we have right now the change of war and the transformation of war that is coming from the conventional style of doing warfare towards the style of doing the hybrid war, informational war, and economic war, lawfare, and other things that are penetrating our society. So thank you. I will stop here and let us discuss more in the class.